Rand Paul is in hot water, and it's not just because of his disagreeing stance on President Trump's reciprocal tariffs strategy that clearly worked. Oh, and earned him the branded title of traitor. But now Rand Paul is also against President Trump's big, beautiful bill.
The bigger a bill, the more it includes, the more difficult it is to get everybody to agree to things. I supported the tax cuts in 2017. I support making them permanent, so I support that part of the bill. I support spending cuts. I think the cuts currently in the bill are wimpy and anemic, but I still would support the bill, even with wimpy and anemic cuts, if they weren't going to explode the debt. The problem is the math doesn't add up. They're going to explode the debt by, the House says $4 trillion. The Senate's actually been talking about exploding the debt $5 trillion. This year in September, when our fiscal year ends, the deficit will be about $2.2 trillion. Now, people used to always say, the Republicans would say, well, that's Bidenomics, that's Biden spending levels. When March, every Republican, virtually every Republican other than me, voted to continue the Biden spending levels, which are going to give us a $2.2 trillion deficit. Now, if you increase the debt ceiling $4 to $5 trillion, that means they're planning on $2 trillion this year and more than $2 trillion next year. That's just not conservative. So I've told them if they strip out the debt ceiling, I'll consider, even with the imperfections, voting for the rest of the bill. But I can't vote to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion. There's got to be someone left in Washington who thinks debt is wrong and deficits are wrong and wants to go in the other direction. The idea that we're going to explode deficits, and the projections are now looking at over $3 trillion in deficits over the next 10 years, I think is just, not a serious proposal.
And I quote, "There's got to be someone left in Washington who thinks debt is wrong and deficits are wrong and wants to go in the other direction." Now, I don't know about Washington, but in California, there are definitely some folks out there who consistently go in the wrong direction.
Donald Trump is threatening to defund California, but it's Econ 101. California is a donor state. We provide over $80 billion more in tax revenue to the federal government than the federal government provides to the people of the state of California. We help pay federal bills. So if Donald Trump's going to continue to threaten 40 million Americans that live in California, maybe we should consider withholding those resources.
Gavin Newsom's recent idea to withhold California's federal taxes based on its donor state status is not a basic economic lesson, but a flawed political stunt. States don't control federal tax collection, as the IRS handles it under federal law. So his threat is legally impossible and ignores how federal and state economies are connected. California pays more in taxes because it has higher incomes, and not because it's unfairly treated. And it still gets significant federal funds for things like disaster relief and social programs. This proposal shows Newsom's focus on flashy rhetoric over real solutions, which worsens California's problems. Perhaps why nobody listens to his podcast, and his ratings are barely holding on to 2 out of 5 stars on Apple's iHeart Podcasts. Under Newsom's leadership, California has turned a $100 billion surplus into a $73 billion deficit with little to show for it, like no new reservoirs or working high-speed rail. His policies, like expanding Medicare without clear funding, strain the budget, while issues like homelessness and crime grow. His approval rating is low at 33%, and stunts like this tax threat make people trust him even less, especially as businesses and residents leave due to high taxes and regulations. Oh, and riots, violence, crime, and looting this weekend should be a wake-up call to many. And I would expect to see future video titles and headlines that read, "Why Everyone is Leaving California." But can you imagine Kamala Harris running for governor in 2026 to fix this mess? How likely is it she'd win? With lopsided left-leaning polls showing 49% support among Democrats, poorly scripted speeches straight from ChatGPT that lie about bringing energy and maybe some tough budget cuts to the state, well, if voters choose to select door number 2 and choose to inevitably inflict harm onto themselves by allowing Harris to unalive what's left of the left coast, well, that is what's left that hasn't been lit on fire already.
Well, California's governor doesn't want the federalized system here. He says he's got it under control. There's no shortage of law enforcement. Gavin Newsom said he's called in California Highway Patrol. He says the Trump administration is seeking a spectacle here. He's saying to protesters, don't get violent, don't engage.
Well, if he was doing his job, then people wouldn't have gotten hurt the last couple of days. We wouldn't have officers with a shattered wrist from bricks being thrown through their vehicles being burned, flags being burned in the street, and Molotov cocktails being thrown. Governor Newsom has proven that he makes bad decisions. The president knows that he makes bad decisions, and that's why the president chose the safety of this community over waiting for Governor Newsom to get some sanity. And that's one of the reasons why these National Guard soldiers are being federalized, so they can use their special skill set to keep peace. We're not going to let a repeat of 2020 happen. And if you remember, it all happened in Tim Walz's state in Minneapolis, which was a neighboring state, and a governor at the time. And Governor Tim Walz made very bad decisions and then tried to get the as governors to send our National Guard in to bail him out when he let his city burn for days on end.
Nevertheless, California would continue to struggle with deep issues like housing costs and bureaucracy, despite Kamala's persistent cackle and guest appearances on raunchy X-rated fans-only podcasts to try to drop some memorable one-liner phrases.
You know, we have to stay woke.
It's fun to picture her saving the day, isn't it? But it ain't never gonna happen. In Stephen King's The Life of Chuck, the world falls apart, and California feels like it's heading that way with Newsom's missteps. His tax withholding idea is like a scene from that story. A desperate move as problems pile up. If California keeps going this way, it might metaphorically sink. And Harris would need more than Cardi B, Lizzo, and Beyonce to pull it back. And much like, spoiler alert, in the movie, I wouldn't be surprised to see California completely fall off the map and sink into the Pacific Ocean. But it sure is funny. Remember when San Francisco couldn't do anything about the crime everywhere and then cleaned it up overnight for Xi's visit? Turns out the solution to the problem of evil government is that simple. And yes, that was eye-opening indeed. Brian Allen attempts to stir the pot here with this breaking post that says, as 2,000 National Guard troops move in on protesters in Los Angeles, Trump struts into UFC 316 with Dana White ringside while the country burns. Quick show of hands here. Who here watching blames any of what's happening in Los Angeles on President Donald Trump? Anybody? Rioters in LA are pouring gasoline on vehicles and setting them on fire. The level of incompetence, ignorance, and liberal bias is astonishing. An LAPD chief says these are peaceful protests. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why President Trump is sending in the National Guard. But deranged Representative Maxine Waters is caught on camera, now outside the ICE facility in Los Angeles, harassing National Guard troops. She's stoking the flames and instigating continued domestic terror with her rhetoric by mentioning civil war. Democrats want violence in the street, and they are freaking disgusting.
And he's using deportation as a way to enhance his position with all of those right-wingers out there who do not want this country to be a country of people coming from other places. It's outrageous, it is horrible, and we've got to make sure that we do everything that we possibly can, because I think he's up to creating martial law. He even alluded to
we got the National Guard here.
What do you think
National Guard
about
for what?
What do you think about the National Guard being here, Trump deploying them and not our own governor?
Well, the thing about it is, I don't know why they're here with guns. Whom are they going to shoot, and for what? Are you going to shoot a kid running away just because they're afraid of them? Are you going to shoot a protester because you don't like what they're saying? Why are the guns? Why are these guns here? That's my question. I don't get why the guns have to be here. We're a sanctuary city. We know Trump doesn't like us. We know that he's going to try to use us as an example. He's going to try to goad us so that he has a martial law. He even alluded to civil war at one point in talking about this issue.
But I digress, because if I allowed myself to continue on and pointing out all these Democrats, their hypocrisy, and how much they hate this country, well, I'd run out of battery life on my phone to finish recording this video for you guys today. So let's get back to what got me so fired up to begin with, and Rand Paul. Rand Paul just got an earful from President Trump, and he really should listen. Why is it that Rand votes no on everything but never has any practical or constructive ideas?
Joining us now is the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Senator Rand Paul. Senator, good to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Your reaction to what you just heard from Caroline Leavitt in terms of the savings that this bill brings about?
Well, I think to put it in perspective, most people estimate that over the next 10 years, the United States will add about $2 trillion a year, $20 trillion in debt. The savings, if you don't think the taxes or the tax cuts will cause a reduction in revenue, which I can accept that, and you say, well, the spending cuts are $1.5 trillion. That means instead of borrowing $20 trillion, we'd borrow $18.5 trillion. So the spending cuts are not nearly enough. The other way to look at this is ask year to year, will we spend more money next year than last year? The answer is going to be yes. Will the deficit be over $2 trillion next year? The answer is yes. This is why my big objection to the bill is they want to ask us to expand their credit line to $5 trillion. So if your teenager at 16, you gave them a credit card, they maxed it out on booze and gambling, and they were $2,000 in debt, and they said, well, Mom, Dad, I want more credit. Would you give them more credit? Congress is like drunken teenagers. They're terrible with money. The example of the explosion of debt is awful and not to be commended. We should be giving them very limited tranches of debt expansion and make them prove to us that they are good with money. But by no means should we give them $5 trillion and say, oh, just keep doing what you're doing. They have a terrible record, so they need more restraint and more oversight, not less.
I understand, but the debt limit date is coming. The X date is when the government runs out of money. As soon as the markets figure this out and start reacting to it, you're going to have a spiral of a decline in the valuations, and that's going to make things even worse. How far are you willing to take this? Are you saying you will not raise the debt ceiling under any circumstances?
Well, just 2 weeks ago, I offered to raise it for 3 months, and I introduced this as an amendment. So I would raise it about every 3 months. I would never default, and I'm not arguing for default, and I'm not arguing for anything that will roil the markets. I offered to raise it $500 billion. But the American people need to know that $500 billion is 3 months worth of borrowing. This is literally out of control. And then I'd come back in 3 months, and that'll be about the time that the government spending will end. We'll have the song and dance about a shutdown of government. There'll be another big omnibus, and I will say, once again, I'm not giving you $1 trillion. I'm not giving you $5 trillion. I'll give you 3 more months, but you have to behave. You have to restrain spending, and they're not doing it. And if they're asking to borrow $5 trillion, that is the example. $5 trillion in borrowing means they are not restraining spending. That's the ultimate summation of all these numbers, is what will the deficit be next year? If it's going to be over $2 trillion next year, none of this is meaningful.
Well, I mean, look, it's supposed to be, according to the expectations from the CBO, $22 trillion 10-year deficit. That's $2.2 trillion a year, and up to $59 trillion in overall debt by 2035. We're showing a chart that Ron Johnson sent us in terms of the amount of money that was spent during COVID. And that's part of the issue here, because Joe Biden went overboard and sent too much money to Americans to help them after COVID. What's the amount of money that you would like to see cut to get us back to pre-pandemic spending? How much?
We have to have less spending next year than we had last year. If you have more spending, you're going to have a bigger deficit. But think about it this way. Who caused the deficit? Well, the first Trump administration passed out $2,500 checks to everybody. We shut the entire economy down. During the first Trump administration, $8 trillion in debt was added. During the Biden administration, $8 trillion in debt was added. This is a bipartisan problem. Both parties have done an abysmal, they have been abysmal at trying to control the debt. So the real question is, will the debt be bigger next year or smaller?
Okay.
Will the spending be bigger or smaller? Right now, spending is going up next year.
Senator, we both know that the majority of the spending is from the entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, 76% of the spending in the budget coming from there. Are you saying you want to cut into those programs?
What I've proposed every year for the last 10 years is a penny plan budget, and it cuts a little bit of everything. But by cutting a little bit of everything, you don't have to cut as much of specific things. Okay. So initially, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we could cut 1% of everything, all entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. In real numbers, you would spend 1% less than you spent this year, and you could balance in 5 years. But when the pandemic spending came, when they shut down the economy and gave everybody free checks, now at these levels, it takes about a 6% cut each year for 5 years. Across the board works, but if you take Social Security, Medicare, and most of Medicaid off the table, you really don't change things materially. So if the deficit's going to be $2.2 trillion every year for the next 10 years, and you cut $150 billion a year, which is what the big, beautiful bill is going to do, you still have over $2 trillion a year. You're still adding $20 trillion over 10 years. It's unsustainable.
Understood.
And someone has to say enough's enough.
His ideas are actually crazy losers, and the people of Kentucky can't stand him. Case in point, Rand Paul's reaction to the insurrectionists in LA attacking ICE officers and waving foreign flags. And I quote, "We should cut the immigration enforcement funding in Trump's big, beautiful bill in half." You really can't make this stuff up anymore, folks.
Senator, there are people who are questioning why you would not support a bill that puts more money into border security, particularly at this moment in time when we see what's going on in Los Angeles this morning. We have some pictures of the violence in L.A. The president had to send the National Guard to Los Angeles. Are you suggesting that the money being spent on the border is too excessive?
What I'm suggesting is that we can add some money to the border, but what they're asking for is excessive. And I'll give you an example. For the fence, they want $46.5 billion. Well, I did the math on this. The current rate, according to the Border Patrol, is $6.5 million per mile. That would be $6.5 billion for 1,000 miles. Nobody's really estimating there's more than 1,000 miles that could be fenced at this point. So that's $6.5 billion versus $46.5. Where's all the money going? I've asked the Trump administration, where's all the money going? As far as hiring new people, I would hire some new people. I would give some bonuses. I'd probably do half as much as what they're asking for because the border is largely controlled right now. And what we don't want is when we wind up looking back at this, have an army of Border Patrol agents that we have on the hook for payments and pensions and everything else. We need to do it judiciously and not in a reckless manner.
Senator, final question here. If the tax cuts are not extended, you will have overseen the largest tax increase that we've seen on the American people. Are you comfortable with that?
I supported the tax cuts in 2017 and still support them. I support making them permanent. I actually accept the argument that if you reduce rates, you can get more revenue. So I support the tax cut wholeheartedly. I've told the president I will support them, but I'm not supporting the debt ceiling. So along with Ron Johnson, we need to separate the bill into pieces. And the debt ceiling can be on something where the big government people can vote for it, but conservatives should not vote to raise the debt ceiling $5 trillion because it's not fiscally conservative. But yes, I will support the tax cuts, have in the past, and continue to do so.
And do you think you'll get Democrats to support that as well, raising the debt ceiling?
They always have. There's no example of Democrats ever voting against the debt ceiling. They love debt. They're for debt. That's the modern monetary theory is add more debt, and they always vote for raise debt ceiling. They voted to increase it in Trump's first term, and they'll vote for it again.
Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much, sir. We'll be watching your work.
Thank you.
Who here thinks Rand Paul should be primaried? And how many of you remember when Rand Paul and Thomas Massie stopped any of Biden's spending bills? Who remembers when Rand Paul and Thomas Massie stopped Biden's open borders? Who remembers when Rand Paul and Thomas Massie held Fauci accountable? Yeah, don't worry, folks. You don't have to actually answer the questions. They're all rhetorical. They're all rhetorical questions. The bottom line, Rand Paul is in hot water after his latest post to X, appearances on legacy news and mainstream media, because we all know the truth and haven't forgotten any of it. And yes, I'm man enough to forgive for the sake of making America great again. Just don't confuse my kindness for weakness. And mark my words, just like Rand Paul was so far off base when it came to Trump tariffs, we'll soon see the same result with the big, beautiful bill. Lastly, I'll share this post from Elon Musk. The most entertaining outcome is most likely.
And that's precisely why we need this bill to pass and to be sent to the president's desk for signature as soon as possible. Because this bill provides $1.6 trillion in mandatory savings. And when you combine that with the tariff revenue that President Trump's America First trade agenda is bringing in, nearly $3 trillion over the next 10 years, that's a projection, according to the Congressional Budget Office. And when you combine that with the Council of Economic Advisors projected growth of 3%, we're going to cut the deficit by $8 trillion over the next 10 years. And look at all of the other pro-growth economic policies this president has taken. He understands the concerns about our nation's crippling debt. That's why we need this bill to pass. It will ultimately reduce the deficit, and the president is very much focused on signing this historic piece of legislation.
Yeah, and